by the South-South Initiative, which goal is to further foster the ESG network in the Global South, increase exchange between scholars, and explore new relevant research themes, but not only research themes, and that's what we were talking about now, but like also teaching. And our aim here is to discuss and explore a little bit about the complexities of teaching environmental politics and governance and law, and particularly in Latin America and Africa. And the idea is to listen to a bit of Anel and Christina's experience, so we can discuss, and yes, a bit about teaching and the syllabus, but also about supervision and like our students and their context. I think this all would help us to understand a little bit more of that. So I don't know, we don't have to be formal or anything like that, but just to organize. If Anel would like to start, I don't know, sharing some thoughts about your context of teaching and supervising and all that, and maybe Christina, and then we could open the conversation if the others would like to share some thoughts on that. What do you say?
Thank you very much, Veronica. Christina, shall I start? Okay, so since I don't think I've met anyone in the room in person, I can just say a little bit about myself and my background. So I'm a legal scholar, but not a typical legal scholar. I'm not black letter law. I work a lot on the intersection between law and governance, and more specifically urban governance in relation to sustainability, which of course suggests that there's a lot of typical and non-typical human rights law feeding into my work, and the dimensions around the structures for decision making, etc. So I've been in this context and in this career of being an academic now for 24 years. I've recently transitioned to the University of Stellenbosch, where I have the chair in urban law and sustainability governance. And prior to that, I was at Northwest University, which is in central South Africa. And there I had a chair in cities law and environmental governance. So it was a more or less a lateral move. But I've for a long time been involved in undergraduate teaching, postgraduate teaching, and then in the last couple of years, very closely involved in supervision, postgraduate supervision, doctoral and master's level supervision. And I mention this because I came to learn that what we do in our undergrad classes becomes so important for stimulating interest for students to become future researchers and future academics. So many people complain about teaching undergrads, and it's a lot of marking, but we should not underestimate the interest we can instill at that level. Students, especially, that always thought that you have a very specific career trajectory, especially in law. You must become a litigating lawyer and you need to go to court, which is not true, as the people in the ESG environment would understand very well. In terms of challenges, there's always challenges when working with young people, but I think what I'm experienced most acutely at the moment is that students would like to feel and see that they can make a difference. So I experience a bit of disillusionment with environmental law as it is. Climate change is not getting better, biodiversity degradation not getting any better, issues of water and air pollution are very severe in the South African context. And so students you need to teach in a way that they still feel confident about the possibility of change, and not shying away from becoming involved through research and otherwise. So that is one of the challenges, which, I mean, it's not insurmountable, but you need to be aware of it. Then, and we alluded to it earlier, is the fact that students have a lot to deal with. in my context, which is the South African context. It intensified after COVID. So socio-economic pressure is real. Issues of exclusion, financial exclusion, and also increasingly so students battling transformation-related issues. So students are not only students of a subject, but they are also part of the university environment that are seen and perceived as institutions of change. So we have students having a lot on their minds, and that is something you should navigate when you are in the environmental space, especially when it speaks to issues of general well-being and not only environment in relation to health. Another challenge that I experience is for students who, and those are students from a more privileged background, that do not necessarily understand the environmental challenges. They are not confronted with it because they can buy them out. They are not confronted with issues of low resilience, whilst other students in class are very much aware of the impacts of a fire or a flood or a drought because of where they come from. Many are from the rural parts of our country, and so they have a very intense experience of environmental challenges, and for them, so you need to understand your audience. It's a mixed audience, even though everyone may be from South Africa. The experience of environmental issues and the application of environmental law are quite different. Then on the positive side, I see students much more interested in the field than what they've been 20 years ago. And that, of course, has to do with climate change and the global ecological crisis being so prominently experienced at the moment. So it's easier teaching it in the sense that students know that it is important and relevant, and therefore they take interest in it. It might be, and this is the last thing I want to say before moving over to Letitia, that environmental law is an elective. It's not yet part of the core curriculum, which I found to be interesting. So students taking environmental law usually has a keen interest in it. So it's not yet part of the core curriculum in South Africa, which is something I think needs to change. But yeah, so that is lovely working with students who really want to be in class. They are not forced, they want to be there. Christina?
But Anel, just a question, perhaps just to contextualize, like your university, is it public or private, and more or less how many students? So we have like a bit of context also.
So it's a public university, Stellenbosch. However, it is a university that is very well resourced. It's deemed to be the second best university in the country. So I've not been here for very long. I've been at a different kind of public university for the biggest part of my career. And student-wise, do you mean in my class size? Okay, small classes, which is brilliant. So I'm talking about maximum 50 students in my undergrad class, and then postgrad would be around about 25. So for me, that's small. I don't know if that's small by any other standard. And environmental law is also presented in the final year of 4 years of undergrad study. So it's a more mature undergrad student that you get. And Christina, I forgot to mention one of the biggest challenges, actually. How could I forget it? Shame on me. The issue of a decolonized understanding of the relevance of the environment and environmental law. That is an ongoing, struggle, so to speak. And it's a struggle not because of the students or my own background. It's a struggle because of the time we have to deal with everything, the international context, the African regional, the domestic, and you literally only have 12 weeks of teaching, which is short. It's a semester course, which is also part of the context.
Okay, so thank you, Veronica. I jumped in a little bit. The only challenge here is that I navigate two contexts because I had most of my career, like more than 25 years, I think. Last, yeah, 24 years or so, but 3 years ago in Brazil, teaching in a public university. In which also environmental politics or global environmental politics was an elective, and so that's the context. In a public university in Brazil, students do not pay tuition. In the beginning of my career, most of the students came from very privileged contexts, like middle class, upper class students. But since the affirmative action policies 10, 12 years ago, perhaps, we have been receiving more and more students from different backgrounds. So in one hand, that enhances diversity. I think we have much more diversity in all senses, in terms of race, but also socioeconomic backgrounds. But some other challenges came with that, for instance, how to fill in some gaps in education from students that come from public schools as well. And sometimes they, in Brazil, as you know, we speak Portuguese, and some, like, the literature is in English. So we had several challenges, so how to navigate that and which kind of literature we could offer and all that thing. So in practical terms, is more or less what the context that we had. But I think the main challenge that with at least me, and I think Veronica now is teaching more there than I am, is how to make the environment relevant for students that don't see it so relevant, and also how to decolonize. I think, because in one hand, I think the whole image, the whole issue of global environmental politics, as it was built in Brazil, was seen as something of the rich. Like, why am I supposed to worry about the environment, to have so much poverty and so much hunger, and that's because how environmental politics and governance and the theories that were built, they were built in this way that separates a lot the environment from society. And being now teaching in the global north, I understand it better, because here is so hard that people says, oh, I'm talking about sustainability, but it's environmental sustainability, as it has nothing to do with social sustainability. So I think this frame of separating society from the environment comes from here, the global, so-called global north, and all the books and texts and everything went to there as in this kind of frame. And this kind of frame also influenced real politics, like all the international negotiations and sometimes diplomacy. In the beginning, they used to separate a lot and say, oh, this is an issue of the rich countries. And until 2000 and until the Rio 92, but and also and a lot after that, in the early 2000s, everything was very separated. And so I think that also helped the students to see something as minor, like, why am I going to do environmental politics? Because it's not so important for Brazil. Brazil is worried about development, about being, how to catch up with the rich countries and how, and all that. And so that's taking a while, I think. I think Veronica, I don't know how. Now, I think now perhaps the last 2-3 years, there's been changing as far as I have seen from a distance. But I still see that many students see the environment as separate from societal issues. And that's a challenge of decolonization, because you cannot separate, like when you talk about climate justice, it's totally linked to issues of poverty and all that, and everything else. So that's so decolonizing frames, and in that sense, that would also help that the curriculum also could be decolonized, because environmental politics is also an elective. It is not, even Brazil, being a country that has such a rich biodiversity, has the largest rainforest on the planet and the largest river basin on the planet, global environmental politics is still an elective. It's not part of, is not a mandatory course for any student in Brazil. Like all the undergraduate programs is not. So that's one thing. So we always, because of that, also that could be seen as something good, because in that sense, the group of students that take global environmental politics, they are ones that are interested. So, and the groups are smaller. I don't know how many students, but I used to have like 20, 30 students in my courses. So that was very helpful. And also for in terms of graduate students, so there'll be even like groups of 10 students. So that was very nice to work with. I think we have, as you mentioned, there's differences of contexts, and with students coming from different contexts, because they face different challenges, but that some of them can see better or can environmental challenges and something closer to them. So that's common with South Africa. I'm trying to see if I build on what you said. I really liked that you said that your students are committed and want to change something. I didn't have so much that experience. For me, in the beginning of the course was to convince my students that, firstly, that you could not separate the social from the environmental. And secondly, to show that it's something relevant for their daily lives. So that was my experience like 3 years ago in the classroom. With supervision, it's totally different, because the ones who choose environmental politics and environmental issues, they're really committed and they do understand the relevance. And I haven't had the experience of students from rural parts of the country. I did have experience started to have some like indigenous student, but only one that Veronica knows more, but I didn't teach her in the end because I moved to the Netherlands. Let me see. Yes, and I totally agree that sometimes I think for environmental politics, and also in terms of curriculum, in terms of issues that are on the course manuals, in textbooks, for instance, sometimes they do not tackle issues related to the urban context. Like you said, water pollution, water access, and all these sanitation things, air pollution, things that people that live in cities, they face in their everyday lives. And in Brazil, they used to call it the brown agenda. I think we don't tackle it very well. And I think we have to do a better job on doing that. And because that's what people who live in the peripheries, they face every day, that access to water and all that, and pollution. I can, one small example that I have, that I noticed from my students, that we had this project in a periphery of Brasilia with kids. And my students went there and we're talking about environmental issues to kids. And I noticed that some of them, because of their experience, it's perhaps more privileged, they couldn't understand that for kids in the peripheries of Brazil, sometimes access to water is a problem, because if they don't pay their water bills, water is cut from their house. And while so like the students were telling, oh, we should be aware of water and take a shower of only 10 minutes, because so you save water, you can turn off the tap when you brush your teeth. And so I was talking to a small child, 6, 7 years old, and she was telling me that she didn't have water in her house. So, and that's in Brasilia, 30 kilometers from the university. And I was so shocked, and this kid told me, you know, sometimes I feel ashamed of coming to school because I cannot take a shower before coming. So, you know, sometimes this gap between rich and poor in Brazil is so huge that people don't really understand this. urban environmental issues in Brasilia that's so close to them, 20 kilometers from the campus. So I do acknowledge that we have to do a better job on this urban environmental issues, in linking them to climate change and to access and to justice. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's for now. Perhaps Veronica, you can jump in also, because you're facing that in your daily more than me. I can also compare things with the Netherlands if you want.
Yeah, but that example that I've heard before from you, Chris, it's so hard and shocking. Now, when you remind us of the difference of thinking of undergrad and grad students, that's super important, and that's true, because when we started discussing this panel at the as a South initiative, the idea was to understand and to discuss more of the challenges involving undergrad students, like undergrad teaching, because as Christina already contextualized, and this is similar, I think, and Leticia couldn't be here, but I think that what she would bring us from Mexico, and I'm super interested to learn more about the South African context, because for master students, they already know why they are studying that, and even if it's not the theme of their thesis, it's something that if they choose to take that course, it's because they want to. And with and they are it's more as a homo. There are less differences between the economic background of the students, less. But with undergrad students, we have this huge challenge in Brazil, which is a great challenge, which is now the university is more democratic. We have different classes in the university, different colors in the university, different, different contexts there. And 20 years ago, when I finished my law school, the context was super different. So now we have, Christina mentioned this example, and I worry that sometimes I'm doing that in my classes, that I'm forgetting the context, that I'm forgetting when I'm giving examples because of the textbooks that I use, because of the themes that, I don't know, we have to cover in the syllabus, that sometimes I'm being insensible about these differences. So I don't know, how does it feel for you? I know a bit how does it feel for Christina, but I would love to hear more on that. It's because when we talk about Professor Matthew Hoffman, he once shared with us his idea of a syllabus, and he put that in practice, including hope and despair as two feelings. Like some of the teachings, it's about despair, because I have to despair, to give them some sense of despair, because they seem so neutral about the whole thing. But then some of the classes has to be about hope, so they don't lose the whole thing. And to do that in a context of extreme of inequalities, I think that is hard, because sometimes you want to catch some part of the attention, but you lose the other, and then you go. Yeah, I think, okay, you can.
No, Veronica, I'm so glad you raised this point, because as you speak, I'm thinking, and one of the strategies, and perhaps that takes us into the next point we wanted to discuss this evening, one of the things I really make a point of doing is to introduce the theory around something in class, but especially with the smaller classes, and it sounds as if Christina also had smaller classes. I let the students speak I would invite examples from class. So I would typically ask, say, for example, you introduce the idea of environmental law being very anthropocentric, which is a theoretical concept. And then you would explain what it means. And then I would ask the students, okay, so do you have examples where you could say, well, the law is being interpreted in an anthropocentric way or in an ecocentric way? And then I would typically have someone who was born and raised in an informal settlement, which I'm sure you can appreciate very well as well. And then you would have someone, so one step back. In the very first class, I always tell my students, we are going to talk to each other here. So if you are uncomfortable doing that, please get over it as soon as you can, because we are also going to do this in a safe space. We are going to respect each other's views. We are going to understand that we come from different backgrounds, that we've been raised in different settings. And yes, that there might even be other differences such as class. I just call it by the name. But I do it without, I'm trying to be sensitive, but from the very start, I make the students understand that we are different, and we can just as well say it out loud. There's no reason to tiptoe around it. So during the semester, I find that students become more comfortable than sharing experiences, to the extent that some of the students would actually say, well, I'm coming from a privileged background, and my experience are the following. And it's then those not from the same background won't feel inferior or something. They would say, well, my context differ, and I'll explain to you how. And then so this bottom up involving the students help not to forget the differences. But yeah, there is a fine balance, because it helps when students come to class prepared, and that you don't have to spend so much time teaching. You know, that there's been some preparatory work at home that you could use class time for discussion. And sometimes that's not possible, because there's important principles and things that students must know and that you must explain. So I'm pretty strict on coming to class prepared, so that we can use that time well, learning from each other, as opposed to reading and discussing what's in the textbook and what you could study on your own. That is just one of my ways of getting them to deal with the theory, so that we, through our examples and things in class, or mock, I mean, in law, we also do mock trials. I give an argument, and half of the class is in favor of the argument, and the other is against it. Whether or not they are really for or against it, they just have to be, which is a requirement in law. You need to be able to defend whatever lands on your table, unfortunately. Yeah, so I don't know if, Christina, you've got a different strategy, but I find that works well. But it takes some time, and it requires of the students to trust me that I'm in control of whatever is going to play out, because sometimes there are things emerging that's sensitive, and so there's a big responsibility on me to realize, okay, now you need to mediate, and you need to see where this is leading, and to stop if you realize that this is going to go too far. Yeah, so emotional intelligence, I guess, is quite important, or at least sensitivity for what you are, who you are dealing with, and what you are dealing with. So thinking about how the class may play out is also important.
Should I jump in? Yeah, that's a challenge, and that you mentioned, that to how to make the students come to class well prepared, so that we can use well the time in the classroom. That's something that I have had and I couldn't solve. Yeah, just to see how to make my students read. In the beginning, it was easier. And in the last 5 years or so, 7 years, I don't know, I think it has become harder to have students reading the material. And
even in the Netherlands, like it's the same challenge in Brazil and in the Netherlands.
in the Netherlands, yeah, it's a little bit different. It's the whole configuration of the course. So, and I have, usually the classes are bigger, so I don't even I don't know if they read or not, because it's more like a lecture, not really. And they have in the afternoon working groups in which they have smaller groups and they discuss among themselves the literature, and they have assignments to do together. So it's a very different configuration. But in Brazil, in the last years, I haven't had this challenge. But what I did, and it worked, it was create this different course in which I would take the students to go to the Cerrado or to the Amazon. That's a totally different configuration for more experiential learning and all that. And that motivated the students to delve more into the issues and all that and go deeper. But I could experience, like in the beginning, like they were not reading it. And so as time went by, and after we went to the Cerrado and I felt that students were reading more. So that was also something that I noticed. But do you use any strategies, like can you force the students to read, for instance, to give?
So it's interesting that you asked that question. I don't know if you've experienced it, that in some classes or institutionally. So Stellenbosch is very competitive. The students are very competitive, and they are trying to ensure that they will land very good jobs in a legal practice somewhere. It was different where I spent most of my career so far, where the students were not so competitive, and they did not necessarily see themselves going into legal practice, but more into the NGO sector or making more of a difference on the ground. And they wouldn't read. They were more interested in just listening to me. But here I'm being kept on my toes. The students actually read. That is interesting. It's the same country, right? And it's also a diverse group of students, but it shows also that it might be different from one institution to the other, even though both are public universities. I guess it also has to do with the fact that it's harder to get into this university, which is something I think Veronica or Christina, you alluded to, the school system. Yeah, I'm hesitant to say this. Is this recording going to go on the internet? I find that when I assess anonymously, right? I don't know who the students are up until the point that I've marked everything, and I can see. It's terrible to see how the divide falls, and I know it's the school system. The students struggling to write and to spell well and to be clear in their conceptualization of an essay answer, for example. Then when you look at the name and you know where this person probably comes from, that is heartbreaking, because that is not the student's own fault. It's a system. It's the school system failing students who could not afford to go to a private school, for example. And so that is definitely a challenge I also encounter, being able to express. Students struggle to express them. They are smart. They are really smart, but they struggle to express themselves orally, but mostly in writing. The writing skills are horrible, and I've had a terrible experience the past 3 weeks where I've marked essay assignments. And I mean, we all hear this, and I'm turning more or less a blind ear. I'm not a tech-savvy person. But yeah, my students are using AI, because Turnitin, our software looking at similarity, is showing me up to 70% AI. And that happens when a student loses confidence in his or her own writing, which is so sad. They don't feel confident in giving me their own work because I can't write that well, I can't properly spell or whatever. So that is a big thing that I think we all face, using AI to our advantage, but at the same time, convincing students that they should develop their own skills, using the aids, responsibly, and I'm still figuring out how to teach my students that. I mean, it's a challenge that I'm not up to it. For me, there's nothing more rewarding than writing something and getting critical feedback and improving that and knowing this is my own work. That makes me very happy. But if you battle self-confidence issues because of background or whatever, it's a problem. It is a challenge, and I don't know if you experience the same.
Exactly the same, Anel. I was kind of shocked that you mentioned because it's true, and I told you I totally support the democratization process in Brazilian universities. I mean, these are public universities, the best universities we have, and we didn't have like most part of the population representation there. I mean, so with affirmative actions, this has changed, and which is super important. But at the same time, we don't have the university don't give the kind of support students need to follow that. And when I face that in classes, and that strategy of using artificial intelligence, like it's super recent from last semester, I can feel that. I know that I have to do something differently because I can't ask them to write. It's not even to write at home and send me, because if they can use that in classes. So I don't know how to do that, but it's a terrible challenge. It's hard because they have, I mean, they are in the right place, that I am sure, and classes are much better because they are there. The themes, I mean, the diversity of thoughts. Christina was telling about how sometimes it's hard to convince students of the importance of talking about environmental challenges, because they have this idea as North rich countries' problem, and that Brazil, and I don't know, some kind of twisted sovereignty perspective of Brazil and its resources and all that, which is, I mean, still there at international relations Brazilian perspective, but you also have now, I also have now the students that can relate. They can relate with their own experience and tell about how they face environmental challenges, and that is important. But at the same time, I have students that are, and we had this discussion like this week, we want development. I know it can be hard. I know it can, but I mean, I want to be part of it. I want to, because I didn't have it yet. So if part of my classes know about it and know that we shouldn't have like cars and individual modes of transportation and all that, and we should invest in public transportation, I also have those students that are telling me, no, this is my dream. I want to have my own car because that's something that no one in my family ever had. And I think this is something central to, for example, to discuss global environmental politics, because discussing development, it's not an easy thing. I mean, even if we want to discuss in more general terms that it's so important to have the transition and all that, when we go to places with high inequalities, I mean, it's hard.
I want to jump in there, Veronica. I also see that in the Q&A, Kelly and others have introduced themselves. So thank you very much for that. And they indicate that they can relate to the conversation, which is brilliant. I also have the opposite experience from time to time, where I have students signing up for the elective, hoping to hear everything about conservation and biodiversity and ecological integrity. So they are very green in their thinking, and this is why they take environmental, and then boom, I hit them with poverty and inequality, and they're like, what? This is not what I signed up for. I didn't want to hear this. So that sometimes also happen where students have a very green understanding, and you've alluded to it as well. And in South Africa, for example, the legal definition of the environment explicitly mentions the social, the cultural, the religious relationship between people and natural resources. So it's definitely not only about natural resources. And the environmental right in our constitution, for example, speaks about everyone has the right to an environment that's not detrimental to human health or well-being. So in that well-being sits so much about the social and the economic and whatnot else. But so yeah, I sometimes having class students saying, this poverty stuff, that's not why I signed up for this module, but that's part and parcel of understanding the bigger picture. And yeah, the global ecological crisis is definitely not only green. So I just wanted to mention that is sometimes something I need to navigate. Students that want to drop out of the module because it's not green enough.
That's interesting to hear, because yeah, most of the students that I had in Brazil sometimes were the opposite. They say, to make them understand that the environment is all colors, it was very hard. And yeah. But on the other hand, like my background is all biodiversity. I work with biodiversity conservation, and I'm totally for conservation. But for me, because I studied about the Amazon, and I could see that biodiversity is so important locally as well. So the green is important also for the to help people to improve their livelihoods. Is not, and for people there in the Amazon, for many people in the Amazon, not all, but for them, destroying the forests, destroying their livelihoods and how they connect to their own lives and how they have their incomes and everything. So the disconnection between these issues is that what for me is a big challenge, and I think partially it comes from this modernity way of thinking that we have from science itself, that separated so much social from environment, nature from people, that for us to navigate is so hard, because so that comes, oh, you're too green, no, you're bringing too much poverty, and these things are so connected. And yeah. We have some comments here on the chat.
I was just going to invite Kelly to open her mic.
Please.
If you can, Kelly, and if you want to, of course. Okay, maybe not now. When you can. You were saying, Anel?
I lost my thought, but it will come back just now. One of the things, and I think it might be unique to law, is ethics. Environmental law is the ideal module also, where to make the law student aware that once you start practice and you have a law firm and you are all for environmental law, you might be confronted with situations where you are approached by a mining company, to use an example, where you need, on the basis of your environmental law knowledge, defend the mining company or help the mining company to get out of liability or responsibility or whatever. And that is a hard thing in a country like South Africa, where income is scarce and work is work. So this is an ethical thing within the environmental lawyer that actually want to defend the environment, but that might be confronted with a situation where the big money comes from the polluters that must be defended. So I just wanted to make the point that ethics is also something that comes into play in the teaching of law specifically. It might be different with politics, I'm not sure. So that was just one more comment I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and yeah, that's something that, well, I think I never thought about, because we assume that our students go to NGOs, to international organizations, work for the government, and a few would work for the private sector. But yeah, and in that sense, for me, for students who go to the private sector, for me, is to try to raise awareness about corporate responsibility, and that even though they are in the private sector, they can do better. But to defend them, that's something I never thought about that could help. Yeah. And we that have been writing about mining as something that indigenous peoples are struggling against, that's
Yeah, I have students that work in private companies, but I don't know. I never thought that as a challenge, but as an opportunity to, like, in a way, interfere, present some kind of different thinking. But yeah, that the difference is that they're not going to defend them in a court or something like that. They are like working there. So I don't know. I think it is different, but I think they like to be presented to different point of views. So, for example, I don't know, some critics about how some company in Brazil, for example, agribusiness, when it's really sensitive to criticize agribusiness, especially with people from the agribusiness. And I have some of my students working for them, and their families are from agribusiness. But when they are in classes, I think I've never experienced something different. They're open to debate and to listen to different thinking. So yeah.
What I also need, or what I've also found useful, is sometimes I think students might actually question my knowledge of the environment and environmental science, and legitimately so. I mean, I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm a trained lawyer. So what I've been doing, and it's really been such a joy to bring in scientists. You just need to pick them carefully. In my early years, I made a mistake of inviting a climate denialist. I thought, I didn't know that I know climate denialists up until the person started speaking in class. That was a disaster. Never to be repeated. It was the dean of the science faculty. I mean, I would have never imagined this guy to be a climate denialist. And here I invite them to open my climate law class. But be it as it may, after that, I've had much more success. But often it is people on the ground and the scientists that actually understand law, policy, and governance much better than we do. And so I bring these experts to class, invite them for guest lectures, and the students love that a lot. Also, together with that, what I've done for the first time last year, I didn't do it this year, I didn't have time, to invite different people who studied environmental law and then went on to in different occupations, so that students can see what essentially and eventually they could do with this module and this knowledge and the skills that they've acquired. So I've invited, to give you an example, someone in an NGO who studied law and is now in an NGO that's involved in strategic litigation. I've invited a younger academic to also show the academic course, then a practicing attorney, and someone working in government who's a legal advisor for government. And so for the students, that also really helped to see how does this theoretical knowledge then eventually help me to just make a living, because ultimately, I mean, you study not just to become smart and smarter, but to do something and to earn a salary. Let's call a spade a spade. You need to make a living from what you study. So I received a lot of positive feedback from that. The students really enjoyed that.
Andrea and Kelly, can you open your mic?
Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, and maybe you already read on the chat. I'm Kelly Santamaria. I'm a PhD student from University of Rosario in Bogota, Colombia. And I have studied international relations, political science, and I used to work in the Colombian Ministry of Environment and in national natural parks. My advisor is Professor Matias Franchini. He has told me about you guys. So I'm kind of a big fan of all your work. And I'm very happy to be here and keep learning about governance. I didn't knew this framework of work, so I'm working on learning all of this. And thank you very much.
Oh, great, Kelly. Nice meeting you. And Andrea?
Hello, can you hear me now? Oh, nice. Hi, and nice to meet you. So I come from a different background. I'm working on water-related research, and I have had teaching appointments before, but currently I'm not on it. But I've seen also from colleagues that are teaching currently that they hear sometimes critiques from the same students, or that they are very aware here as this relationship of global north doing research in and about the global south. So I was wondering if you would see also in your classes or with your students how that is perceived. Is that perceived as knowledge appropriation or stealing even, or even some sort of neocolonialism, or is that just something that does not appear often? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Who would like to answer, Andrea?
Thanks for that, Andrea. It's an important thing we need to discuss, I think, in this forum, because it also speaks to the materials that we prescribe. So I deliberately try in my courses to expose my students to authors from everywhere. We have less people in Africa writing on environmental law, for example, so it's not that easy. I really need to make an effort to go and source additional materials other than the very well-known people, amongst others from Germany. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things happening there. The United States, especially in my city work, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the United States, and my students must be aware of that as well. I think academics like myself are more sensitive to the issue of knowledge appropriation than the students. Many of my students have not moved around enough to understand or to have an issue with this. It's only when you grow into better understanding different arguments and start comparing interpretations of certain things. I must say that it's not yet a problem with me. It's as if students appreciate the fact that we acknowledge that there's different understandings of different things. But my sense is that it's more of an issue among academics, people doing research, than it is among my students for now. It might be different for Christina and even for Veronica, but there's a sense of appreciation for difference rather than a resistance to material and knowledge generated by global north scholars, even if it is on the global south. Yeah, so that's just my experience at the moment.
Do you,
Veronica, do you have an example?
Okay, I'll start and then you go, Chris. All right. Yeah, Andrea, I think I teach global environmental politics in an international relations international relations course, and the thing is, because of much of the literature is in English and it's from US and I don't know, parts of Europe. And for them, it's normal. It's not something that they are not used to. It's how we study international relations. We read the European and the North Americans, and that's it. And I mean, we try to do something differently, but that's the main thing. So then I think the problem is that because they are so used to read this about, and we are used to read about ourselves from this perspective. So I don't think they realize that so often. And I think one of my jobs is to try to highlight when this is happening, when we are, because if we learn only to do that, we reproduce that. So sometimes they are talking about Brazil as a case study with some foreign perspective, and that as something natural. So I think it is one of our challenges in classes. I think our challenges, because I know Christina also tries to face this challenge.
Yeah, that's challenging. I think there are two dimensions, as Anelo expressed. I think we as researchers are becoming more and more aware of how we decolonize knowledge, because we ourselves, at least me, I was totally educated in one kind of view of science, what's theory, what are methodological approach. So I'm changing myself. I think that's the first thing. And in the classroom, and I think as time went by, I have also been trying to diversify the sources, because in terms of our duty as teachers is that to diversify sources and all that. But interestingly, I have had very bright students, even when I was teaching international relations theory. And one of the concepts that I think Veronica knows, I don't know if Anel have heard, the epistemic communities. That's a concept that comes from environmental politics literature, and talks about how environmental treaties were signed after there was some kind of consensus that was built coming from specialists that try to convince different policymakers in different contexts. And so that made it easier to coordinate interest. And so you have agreements between countries that come from a common knowledge that comes from specialists. And one of my students in class asked me, but teacher, and they say professora in Portuguese, but do you know how scientists from the Global South participate in those networks? Are they represented? And so that question was so good, because it's true. Like, even when we talk about something positive related to global environmental agreements, and that science plays a role and scientists influence that, perhaps fewer scientists from South Africa, from Brazil, are able to be heard, because we have several layers of exclusion. I think the main layer of exclusion that we have are the local poor people in our countries, like in Brazil, like in the peripheries of the urban contexts, indigenous peoples, um, poor farmers. But another layer is really, even as scientists from the so-called global south are less represented also in this global forum. So even though we can be considered privileged in our own national context, when we are in the international context, it's the same. So, and this whole exercise of trying to build this South-South initiative and trying to build collaboration among the global South scholars comes also from that realization that even in science, scientists from the so-called global South are less, we have fewer voices. And if we have fewer voices, of course, you don't bring your perspectives. So in that sense, I think it's not so much about the global North researching about the global South, but how we from the global South research and do research in our context and what could be our contributions. And perhaps we can bring different contributions, not that the concepts of epistemic communities could be, it's an interesting concept, but perhaps we can either have more diverse epistemic communities, or perhaps come with a different concept, like it comes from other experiences and all that. So that's the next step. But yeah, so I don't know if I answered or just made it more confusing.
Yes, thank you very much. I completely understand what you were saying. Also, how I also studied in Chile. I grew up there and everything. So I also come with that background, and I completely understand it. But being here, I'm also very happy whenever I get the chance to collaborate with researchers from there, or if a student says, hey, I want to do some work related to South America, I'm like, oh yeah, great, because then I want to visualize also all the topics. So then I'm conflicted with this that I've been now hearing from colleagues as well. So thank you.
Andrea, I can perhaps add that in my master's class, I have quite a few exchange students, mostly from Europe. And for me, it's so beautiful to see also how carefully they go about doing their research papers and things on the African context. So I have a module on the SDGs. It's devoted fully to the SDGs, and it's as if they are not apologizing, but they would say that they would admit I'm not from this context, but my interpretation of things is, so it's actually, it seems as if the students are also very sensitive not to be seen to impose recommendations or whatever to people or institutions or whatever, in my case in the African context. And I think there is something to be said just for honesty in one's research. I think it's being overconfident about a context that you don't fully understand that might be problematic. But if you admit your vantage point and where you come from, I think it's valuable that people that might have more resources, scientists, be it social or environmental scientists or natural scientists, being well resourced and that can objectively research certain aspects, I think by all means. But it becomes difficult when one, for example, venture into something like the relationship between African religions and conservation. I think it's also about what exactly you study that might be problematic. But there's a lot to be researched that I think can be done by anyone, just so long it's honest research and responsibly executed. Yeah, so I don't know if we've answered your question. I hope we did.
Yes, thank you very much.
We have like 15 minutes. I don't know if we have to stay this 15 minutes, but what do you say we go back to your suggestion, Anel, and think about the next conference and what maybe we could do. I don't know if you have any suggestion, Chris, Anel, Kelly, and Andrea. I mean, we could think of something for the South initiative. I mean, and it doesn't have to be like a panel. It can be some other format that we could continue this conversation.
Even a workshop where we share experiences with a view to perhaps establish some form of a community. I think that I see here in the Q&A also one of our participants having mentioned syllabi and the sharing of syllabi. That would be more difficult. I mean, I'm in law and you guys are in politics, for example, so I don't know if that might work, but in terms of teaching strategies, to have some form of a community that meets twice a year or whatever, online, obviously, if in person is possible, and someone presenting and others. But that, I mean, I'm talking now about a possible outcome after the conference. So we could in the conference just have, or a round table, but I don't think we should have a panel. I think it should be more interactive. A few people could introduce a few topics, but if we can have literally like a round table and people participating, but yeah, I might have to think. I didn't think about it before this evening, and it's becoming late, so my thinking skills are also dropping.
Yeah, I mean,
but
we
that
don't
we should
have
do
to...
something. I think we should definitely do something. That is, yeah. I think there's a lot of scope.
Oh, and we don't have to decide now or anything, but it's so interesting to find out about all these similarities. And I think it's interesting for us because we as teachers face this, but also for our students. I think if they could recognize the similarities in this context, that could be interesting, like open some minds and maybe empower some of them. I don't know, to broad the vision. I don't know how to do that. But I think it would be pedagogically interesting for them as well to be part of this.
Yeah, we have to. So I agree. It should not be a standard panel, because in fact the South Africa conference will be is also about trying to be more creative and propose different innovative panels. And so I'm thinking here how we could come up with something that's could be like a round table, but also I did that in the ISA once, International Study Association, that everybody came with like a sample of teaching. You know, as you say, perhaps because it's kind of late now, I designed it, but I forgot all about. I would have to find where I wrote down. So, but it was something like each one would come with a small sample, would present for 5 minutes, and after that we created an interaction with the audience, so-called audience. But you know, kind of things disappeared from my mind. But it was like, as we gave flash classes, like, you know, doing some small sample of one class and one strategy, and everybody would do that in few minutes, and after that we would discuss things related to teaching. But we could perhaps, like, you know, your debate, if I don't know if can simulate a small thing that would be for for the public to participate for 5-10 minutes. So we go to another way, but so, and from that we could tease out which are the challenges and how we can create a platform of exchange, whatever.
I like that, Christina. And I'm just as I'm sitting here thinking about a possible model that I've never experimented with this, but think about the possibility of us having 5 questions that we ask students to answer, and we record them. And we come to the session, all of, well, say 5 or 6 or 7 of us, having interviewed each 2 students with the same set of questions, and to also work around the responses that we got from the students. That might also, together with your idea of what I like, we could have one topic and say, how would you design a lecture around this? Come and give you a quick lecture. And then we see how different people approach the same topic, but from different perspectives, and how our students respond differently to, I mean, a generic set of questions about how we teach or what we teach or whatever. I think, yeah. So, yeah, that's a bit different, I guess. And if that is what the conference organizers want, who are we to disagree?
I think that it's super interesting. I mean, both suggestions, but I was a bit worried, not worried, but how, if this is a South-South initiative, what's the specificity? I don't know, is there something different about teaching in the Global South? And when you suggest that, Anel, maybe that difference would come, because that wouldn't mean that this workshop must be exclusive for Global South teachers. But if we depart from that, maybe we don't lose these voices. Because I think the main challenge, I mean, how not to lose Global South voices in this like more generic discussion about challenges of teaching and how to be more interactive and how to strategies and all that. Because sometimes, I don't know, I'm speaking for myself, when I go to this kind of discussions, I feel like I'm not really there, because all of the context that we were discussing before got lost. So how to design that without losing this from sight?
I think we can keep the conversation. We have just to pay attention to the deadlines, and perhaps we can all think together, create a Google Docs, and everybody puts ideas, and we can try to design. And we perhaps set another meeting to talk, because at least we will have the agency of the South-South initiative to start that conversation. And so it's not restricted to the so-called Global South, but it's...
And not only to teachers, but maybe who are, I mean, someone interested in teaching or something like that.
And about the students, because it's going to be in South Africa, I think, because we cannot take students from the so-called Global South, because sometimes it's even hard to pay for scholars to be perhaps 1 student or 2, we can, but perhaps if you could think of students, the thing, the conference is going to be in Kruger National Park, right? And I don't know, yeah. So I don't know that context, if you know the context.
It is, yeah, and it's going to be difficult to get students there. It's going to be difficult getting people there generally, I must say. Yeah, it's not that well connected, and it is, it's, I mean, for me, it's literally 2 days traveling, and I'm in South Africa. But that's why I think perhaps we could, well, I mean, we've got technology on our side. We could do a hybrid thing, or we could do the pre-recordings.
Record videos. Our students are TikTokers. They can record videos and we could...
Absolutely. We didn't even speak about that, the impact of social media, right?
Oh, Andrea and Kelly, I wrote my email. I don't know if it's you can see that. If you are interested in like going to the ESG conference and helping to organize this session meeting, I don't know, you are more than welcome. Okay.
Thank you.
Now,
I cannot see.
Thank you.
There it is. Thank you.
now I liked your idea more than the things that I started in the beginning. So if you could write a few lines about this thing, about this that you said about having this question, asking the students, and so perhaps we can start from that.
I will, Christina. I need to develop it still a little bit in my head, but we could, I mean, work on those questions together, and it need not be a recording. I mean, we could dish the questions out in class. And I mean, so it's a little bit of a research experiment about our students experiencing how do they experience what we teach and how we teach. And then for us to contemplate a little bit whether or not the experiences are the same or different, or whether or not we are perhaps disconnected, not from the global north, but from our students. I mean, we all get our assessments, and but there are differences. There are definitely, I mean, I might be older than you guys, but I mean, the students are confronted with so much information and not necessarily crap. There's a lot of good research out there to navigate. I mean, if I had to do my PhD now, it would have been so much more complicated. There's just so much more out there to research now, as an example. But so I think there is something to be said to ensure that we are not only talking about teaching and about our students without also hearing their voices in one way or the other. And it's not going to be possible to take students to the conference for many people. So then we can have their voices through a little bit of a survey from done in different parts of the world. I think that can be interesting, right? I've never done such a thing. I just thought of it now. So please don't think I'm an expert in this. I'm not.
Yeah, the TikTok idea is also interesting to see if they can make, after we do the exercise and those short, they are very good at doing short videos.
And we can ask them to speak the language they prefer, and we can translate if you want to. I think that it's important,
Yes.
so we can really listen to them.
Yeah.
And we have just to think afterwards how we involve our audience in the day of the conference in a way that we provoke them to think about teaching and these questions that we just talked about, perhaps.
That's a great idea. I think it's going to be fun to do that.
When is the conference, Veronica? When exactly?
August 2025.
August?
Yes.
I thought it was
But
November.
Yeah, it's going to be August, but I forgot exactly the dates.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's
Oh,
August.
18 to 21. It's in my agenda, August. 2 days traveling, Anel, from where you are to the conference.
Well, there's a small airport, and the flight's going there 2 times a week from where I am. I took my boys there for the first time in May this year, and it was literally 2 days on the road. Yeah, we traveled, I think, for 16 hours, slightly more. So it's not undoable, and I know I'll make it. Kruger is fantastic. It's just logistically, it's a bit like Parachi. it's an effort to get there, but it's very rewarding once you are there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I see. Okay, let's stop here. And Anel and Christina, thank you so much. I mean, it was a great conversation and to learn from you. And I hope to see you in August next year.
And
Or
we
next-
stay in touch in between, right?
Yeah, yes, we have
Sure.
to stay in touch and yeah, let's start a Google Doc and we brainstorm, and so we have a meeting, finalize whatever the abstract or whatever, and submit.
Mm.
And
Thank
Andrea
you,
and Kelly,
everyone.
thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so
Hope to
much.
see you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Rusha. Bye.
Tchau.
Thank you so
Tchau,
much.
Cris.
Yeah.
Até
Bye.
mais. Como é que fecha? Sabe? Que,